Now we're ready to enter the question and answer portion of the evening. A couple of ground rules to set out is that when you checked in, we had people indicate if you wanted to ask a question. Now, obviously, maybe your question was answered, and if so, that's fine. You can just raise your hand and say, no problem, go to the next one. But we're going to take people, we're going to call people up to the microphone in the middle so that we can get this all on the record. We're going to call people up to the microphone in the middle in the order that you signed in, if you indicated you want to ask a question. Because we have so many folks who want to ask questions, we ask you to keep it to one question per person, and we ask you to limit your question to a minute or less. That's so that everyone can have an opportunity to ask. If we have additional time, once everybody has had an opportunity to ask a question, then we'll go back and you can ask a second question.
Is this considered an open forum? I mean, it seems to me like there's been several hours from one side and probably only a few minutes from the other side. That doesn't seem like quite equitable to me.
This is a public information workshop where we'll have an opportunity for folks like yourself to come up.
1 minute doesn't equal 3 hours or whatever. Why is that equitable?
Because the purpose of this is to learn more about what's going on with this proposal and where it stands in the process, and for you to raise questions that you might have.
And concerns?
Absolutely. All right, so we'll go ahead and begin. If at any point you have follow-up questions or don't feel like your question was adequately addressed, Lars, the person standing in the back, is ready to take your information, your complete question, and we will make sure that Restoration Systems or one of the experts gets back to you personally to address that question and make sure all of your concerns are addressed. So the first question comes from Bob Emanuel. Is Bob here?
Yes, I have no question. I defer to the others.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Emanuel. The next question is Michael Williams.
No question.
You guys are making this too easy. The next question is David Rhodes.
Yes, my name is David Rhodes.
Can you just come stand at the microphone? Thank you.
My name is David Rhodes, and I live here in Raleigh, in fact, very near Headingham. And I was wondering about how long we should expect to see the benefits of, once the dam is removed. What is a time frame do you think that we might start to see the benefits of the dam removal?
Great. Adam, do you want to start? Thank you, David.
Am I on? Am I on? No? How about that?
Speak up.
I'm trying. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
there we go. All right. Might be a PhD, but I can't operate a microphone. Answer to your question is it depends on what particular part of the ecosystem you're looking for a change in. Expect to see habitat start to shift as soon as water is released from behind the dam. And then once the habitat, and that will be an ongoing process. It'll happen a little bit more with each flow, each rain event or release from Falls Dam. It'll redistribute some of those sediments and into new forms and put them in new places. And that is the basis of most of the change you're going to see, because that will become the habitat that will then support the biology as it comes back into the impoundment. So it'll take some time, and I think that Tim and Matt here can expand on that a good bit. As far as water quality goes, that will be pretty instantaneous. Usually you don't have these water quality problems in the winter months. It's in the summer months. So if the dam is removed in fall, winter, come spring and summer, you won't have those issues anymore. Anybody else want to expand?
So with the dam removal projects that we've been involved in doing the monitoring of, as well as the literature on dam removal that exists throughout the country and the world, some of the fastest responders are those benthic macroinvertebrates. And why that's important is that those are going to be one of the essential bases of the food chain for the fishes, and birds and other things will come in there and be able to take advantage of some of the shallower habitats. And while they may not be eating the bugs directly, some of the smaller minnows will also be attracted to those birds. And so the benthic macroinvertebrates responding within the first season is something that we've seen in the past. And, they don't get to their ultimate improvement in that first season, but you already see a dramatic shift because a lot of their lifespan is annual for some species, while it's several years for some of the longer lived. But they'll be coming in and deposit the eggs, and as soon as the flowing water habitat is there in the riffles, which is one of the most rich habitats in a river ecosystem like that, you'll start to see the change that following spring. I'll let you talk about fish species.
Yeah, but basically, I guess every dam removal is different, and different systems will respond at different rates. Our experience with the two that we've been involved with, Carbonton Dam and the Lowell Dam, the fish community response was fairly quick. Within the first year of monitoring, we saw improvement and continued to see improvement through the 5-year monitoring period. We didn't expect the mussels to show improvement very quickly, and that's mainly associated with their life cycle. They require a fish species to complete their life cycle. They're not very mobile, so it takes them a while to populate new areas. However, with Carbonton, the mussel recovery was quite a lot quicker than we expected. By year 3, we were seeing rare species that weren't there before show up in low numbers in the former impoundment. With Lowell, that was a little slower, but we did see improvement by year 5 with the freshwater mussels.
Great. We good? Okay. The next question comes from Mr. Bob Davis.
Realizing that we're not talking about a specific point in time, but a range of time period, I'm just curious what kind of time frame we're talking about for the actual removal down the line.
Do you mean the deconstruction of the dam itself, or the time period from now to when it would be deconstructed?
I'd like to know when it will be deconstructed. So I guess, yeah, how much longer are we looking at before it would actually happen?
Well, I'll just say that's kind of a permitting question in our business. That's always, an important question, and we've learned the hard way over the years that we don't count on things happening anytime soon. Okay, and as you can see, we're at a preliminary stage, and we've got 4 years into it. I would say most hopefully by next fall, most likely by the following fall.
Thank you. Jim Nelson is next.
I have several questions, but I'll start with one since that's what you said.
Thank you.
It's a simple one. How much will the water level in the river be reduced?
Great question, and as you can imagine, that's probably on a lot of people's minds, and I apologize for not including that information in the presentation. But for whatever reason, my 60 slides didn't have room for it. No, the answer is it depends, and I hate to be a broken record because that was the answer to my other question, or to the other question, but it depends on where you're looking in today's impoundment. The dam, obviously it creates deep water, but the water gets deeper as you get closer to the dam. So there's quite a variation in the depth of that impoundment now. If you're at the very top of it, it could be a foot or 2 right now. If you're at really close to the dam, it could be 8, 10 feet. So I think worst case scenario, you'll see an adjustment under normal flow conditions close to the dam of about 8 feet. Now, as you go upstream...
So the water by the dam will be 8 feet shallower?
That would be my expectation, yes. Now, as you go upstream, you're going to find much shallower areas and much deeper areas, depending on where you are, because what we'll see, pools will form and riffles will form, and so you'll see a lot of variation in depth in the impoundment.
How will that be conducive to canoeing and kayaking?
It should be okay. I've canoed the river both above the dam, above the impoundment, I should say, and below the impoundment. And I think that for those that are curious and have access to the river, That's what I would encourage you to do. Put in above the impoundment, float to the impoundment, and get a sense for what that stretch of the river is like without a dam. Then once you get to the impoundment, you'll know it. It will change enough that it'll get slow, it'll get deep, it'll get a little wider. And then be very careful, portage around the dam, put in below it, and float a little further. And you'll get a sense of what, it'll be different above it and below it. But it's a river above it and below it. And that should give you some sense of what to expect.
Thank you. Camille Warren?
Hi, I'm Camille Warren, and I'm a kayaker. I'm a member of 2 paddling clubs based here in the Triangle. And I did notice that one of the factors that are considered are recreational factors, and my interests are historical and recreational. I've done a lot of research on the web about the dam, and it's got some very interesting history. The original dam was built as an 8-foot timber dam before the Civil War, and then around 1900, the current granite block and masonry dam was built, to a height of 16 feet supposedly. The granite blocks were locally quarried, and given that and the fact that the dam is so much a history of this area, I really feel like they belong to Raleigh and Wake County, and it would be really wonderful if the blocks would be donated to the city of Raleigh for it to use as it sees fit in the Milburnie Park that it will build someday. The other thing, as a paddler, I enjoy flatwater paddling and have enjoyed paddling the flatwater stretch above the dam, but I also do whitewater paddling and have enjoyed that. In some of the old historical references I have read about Milburnie Dam, some of the very old things I found referred to even older documents that talked about Milburnie Falls. And of course, we all know these dams that were built for power generation to run mills or whatever were often built at falls because they could take better advantage of the fall of the water. And there are places in the country where dams have been removed strategically in such a way as to create really nice whitewater features. And in fact, in San Marcos, Texas, dam removal was done in such a way that created this beautiful river park with whitewater features. And it would be, given the fact the dam is coming down, there's very likely some interesting natural whitewater features there. Nobody knows. It's been 150 years. It would just be a real shame to pass up the opportunity to take advantage of that using what's there and perhaps even some of the blocks to create a wonderful whitewater paddling location. And so that's not really a question.
No, but I think...
No, that's a fine comment, though, and I'm glad the Corps of Engineers was here to see it, that there's public support for doing that. You can imagine when we do that, it tends to just complicate the plan because we've got a particular objective we're trying to reach. But if it can enhance the plan and make it more attractive to have it removed and help please our regulators, then of course we would consider that. Now, we've already done a lot of work with Elizabeth Gardner of her club,
Right.
and actually going to be
And
contributors.
I belong to that club.
Yeah, and we're going to contribute to the Whitewater Park, and we're going to follow along. We feel like we're a part of that river's community. So whether we do something on the site, possibly as a result of your comment and the interest of the Corps, or whether we're working upstream with the paddling groups, that's one of our objectives. We want to make recreation better on the river, and very much appreciate your comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Betty Rhodes is next.
I'm really concerned about the area around Hedingham, and that was answered for me.
Okay. Thank you. Ed Brandel.
Good evening. My name's Ed Brandel. I live in the Foxcroft subdivision. And like many others here, I feel like we're kind of being shortchanged by the brief time we can spend up here. I wanted to ask several things, but under the conditions that prevail, I don't think I can. I was asking, one question I wanted to ask though, and I had several, but
Mr. Brennan, please ask all the questions you like. We don't have as large a group as we might have thought. If you want to ask a couple of questions, we'll do it.
well, it's good to know. Have you considered a fish ladder? Because there are several of us that would be glad to fund a fish ladder to begin with, if that was one of the main problems that you were facing and the reason you wanted to build the dam, take the dam down. Was it because of the shad going no further? They've come 120 miles. I don't think another 15 miles is going to make that much difference to the shad.
It likely, well, there are a couple of things going on. One, it's a little bit like putting dance shoes on a cow. You know, you've got an ugly, decrepit facility there. Well, ugly in some people's views and others, but it's a decrepit facility which is continuing to grade, continuing to get older, continuing to get less stable. And to take a very sophisticated thing like a fish ladder and make it an integral part of it is taking something that's very unstable and uncertain and putting a modern device on it, which seems unwise. Second, as an economic proposition, it might be a good idea if you get past those concerns, but that wouldn't produce the credit sufficient for us to probably either fund the fish ladder or make it worthwhile. We don't get the same number of credits for doing such an action as we would for what we're doing here.
I thought that was one of the main reasons, getting the shad a little further up the river and toward the dam.
It is. There are actually 4 different things we have to achieve to get the credits that we've defined. So if we only achieve that, it would be 1/4 of the value of the project.
Well, you know,
or even less.
I've been up down that river a lot of times in my boat and in those estuaries and so forth, the wetlands, and my opinion is that, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's a lot of wildlife in there that's going to be destroyed, just a lot of wildlife. And we had the opportunity to go down to the lake, Laura Dam, and let me tell you, those people down there, they're hot. I mean, I wouldn't even want y'all to go through that town now because they're hot. They didn't like the results of it at all. We went down there and walked up around the pond, the lake, the river, that is, and you'd see tire over here and this and that and the other, and the mayor, they were just hot under the collar. They were just ready to boil over. And I'd hate to think that this would be left the same way. And who would clean up the debris upstream for the
Well, we're going to have to work with the agencies on that. There's always some concern. They consider the woody debris in there to be a benefit to wildlife. So we've got to be careful, but I think we can work out something where we can get passage through if there is an adequate passage. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, but nature will take care of it for one thing. The Lowell Dam has gotten nothing but better and better behind it. It gets continually cleans itself out in a natural manner, and I imagine this river system will do the same thing.
Well, I just know that there's a lot of junk been put. I fish the river a lot too. Mattress springs and VW motors and everything else are in there. So there's a lot to be considered in the cleanup if you go that route.
Well, just remember, all that's in there right now. It would be an aesthetic thing to take it out because whatever environmental damage or toxic damage and that kind of stuff, that's going on right now. So this only gives us a chance to clean it up that we don't have while the dam's there.
So you would clean up you'd clean up everything that's exposed?
I can't commit to that now. I'm not going to commit to cleaning up everything that's exposed. If it's woody debris and that type stuff, but if there's an old Model T sitting out behind the dam, I guarantee you we'll drag it out.
Well, I guess you would, but and by the way, I want to say something to the people that are Howard's family. I knew Howard for 50 years, and he was a good man, and I appreciated him a lot. I was in JC's with him and so on, and I was with him about a week before he died, and I'm going to miss him. I know you do. I'll defer to the rest of the people. But I stay out of that area down there in the Laura Dam. It wouldn't be safe, I don't think. Boy, they were hot.
Take a look at the Carbonton Dam. It's a larger river and kind of more similar to this one. If you ever make it down there, it's only about a 45-minute drive, and it's quite attractive.
Thank you.
Next question is Mr. Bill Jones.
My question's been answered.
All right, thank you, sir. John Connors.
Hello, I'm John Connors, and as a wildlife biologist, I appreciate what you do. In this particular case, I have to admit I'm a little skeptical of the benefits, and here's why. You know, we're trading ecosystems here, I think. So there is a functional, vibrant, as Ed said, wildlife-rich environment that's there right now, up above the dam. My concern is when we take the dam out, which I would normally support, the river system that's up above, from there to the Falls Lake Dam, that has, you know, the city of Raleigh made a decision when we put Falls Lake Dam in to infill that floodplain, that watershed. And that is some of the heaviest neighborhood development that took place in Raleigh. So all the streams that we're talking about, a good percentage of them, like Perry Creek, which I'm very familiar with, these are highly impacted streams. And so sending the shad upstream to breed in these areas, you know, is a little bit wishful, I think. I can defer to my friend Mike and Tim. You know, maybe you can tell me more to reassure me that this will actually work, that the shad will go up there and have success breeding. You know, a measure of them making it to Falls Lake Dam is not a measure of success. It's a measure of success of the breeders surviving up to there, but we really should measure whether they successfully spawn and whether their young make it back downstream.
Well, you want me to?
Go ahead, take a shot.
Yeah, I think when they do the success criteria, they will be required to measure.
Mike, I'm sorry, introduce yourself.
I'm Mike Wicker with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I think when they will be required to show the reproductive product, you know, little fish. And so they'll be required to do that. I think if you look at most of these fish, you know, this is not working, is it?
No, it's working. That's working.
The striped bass, the American shad, and then, you know, there's a couple species of sturgeon too. And, you know, the sturgeon, you know, up in, that we don't really know how far they go up, but, you know, they may go up there. And, but if you look at the tail race of Falls Lake and look at the water coming over the lake, it's high DO, it's relative, you know, it's fairly clear, it's good water quality. And I suspect the bulk of the actual productivity to augment the population will be proximate to Falls Lake. So the thing about these fish is that they have, you know, very high fecundity. And, you know, you might have one individual that has 500,000 or, depending on the species, several 100,000 eggs. And so that's where I think the real benefit is going to be, not so much up the tribs at all, but, you know, getting right in that clean water coming off the tail race of falls. And so, but you're right. In the end of the day, what we really want to do is get these where people might be able to see a sturgeon in North Carolina. You know, most North Carolina natives have never seen one. They're seeing them back up in Richmond now. You know, where guys that have lived there for 40 years and they're seeing 6-foot sturgeon, you know, swimming under the bridge. It's kind of neat.
Because of dam removal.
Well, because of habitat restoration. I think, you know, they've done some spawning. And, you know, they've done dam removal there too, but they've done a number of things there. So, but that's what we're shooting for.
Is there any value in releasing those little fingerling shad that they're doing now? People are raising them and releasing them to recolonize rivers in North Carolina. Would there be any value in actually doing a test run, like letting some of those things go up in Perry Creek or someplace upstream and see what the survival is this year?
Well, we've got the national fish hatcheries, and, you know, we've got a fish hatchery in Edenton, and we realize that the production in a natural system exceeds what we can possibly produce in our fish hatchery system. In other words, if we can get the noose working, you know, we could do the productivity of 4 or 5 national fish hatcheries.
Well, my question is really like, you know, the macroinvertebrate populations in those headwater streams is very low. So there's not that much for these shad, you know, hatchlings to eat. Well, that's what they're eating.
Yeah. You're not looking at the, although the food form is small larvae, the fish, of course, when it's fertilized, you've got that egg sac, and then the eggs all set, and then they've got to feed. But really what you're doing is inoculating the downstream area. If you look at the distance between Falls Lake and the ocean, or the estuary, really your upstream areas are really inoculating that with the larvae and stuff that use that nursery habitat that's all those miles downstream. The important thing to think about, John, is that Hightower would be a good one to say this, but he would say multi-volcanic rock is basically a rocky, riffly area. And if you look at the Neuse, you've got some around Smithfield, you've got some around Goldsboro, but then when you're really getting into Raleigh, that's where you're really getting into the rocky bottom on the Neuse. When you go up towards Falls, if you've been in that stretch, that's really area. Primo habitat. So by getting the fish, there's plenty of area there to produce enough spawn to really utilize the nursery area habitat in the main stem Neuse. But there's not spawning habitat in all those miles of the coastal plain. It's just not suitable spawning habitat.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to what Mike was saying. As far as even if Perry Creek was a good quality creek, probably wouldn't expect American shad to go up into those small creeks. It's kind of a river spawner. And then one other point to make is, the migratory fish is just one component of the aquatic restoration. If you look at our baseline studies, our upstream control sites and our downstream control sites, the fish community at the control sites was much more what we'd expect in a free-flowing river than what's in the impoundment. To give you an example, the freshwater mussels, as far as abundance, we measure abundance by how many we find in a certain period of time, how many per hour. The 6 sites within the impoundment, I think we're looking at 8 or 9 mussels per hour, whereas the downstream control sites were up in the hundreds per hour, and upstream control right near the Falls Tail Race, looking at 70 individuals. So there's definitely an adverse effect to those communities from existing dam.
Next question is from Janet Bussett. I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Hello, everybody. I've been following this dog and pony show for 2 years. I live in Foxcroft, which borders the impoundment. The neighborhood's 180 acres. It's Raleigh's little secret. It's full of nature. You come in there and there's deer everywhere. Turtles that are 40 years old. So what I would ask as part of the process is somebody come in there and sample our neighborhood and see what we have before this happens and then after it happens. But I do want to say thank you to Mr. Rixby, Martin Dole. I've been following your work for several years. Thank you. Actually, I read your thesis this week. It gave me a headache. Got through it. Yeah, so I have some firsthand experience, like you, with the Lowell Dam, and I chime in with Mr. Brandel. I'm not going to repeat what he said. But what was interesting was that it was your hope that your research would help with future dam stream mitigation projects. Follow you there. I think that's great. I'm not going to fight or say the dam going away. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go a different angle. Use that work that you have. I think it's great. It's not scientifically defensible because it's based on standards that you came up with. It's all research, but it's something that nobody else has probably done yet. Okay. what I think we need to do here, and I thank you that we have this opportunity to come together and get this out on the table. I've been into this for 2 years, and I'm getting a headache. So it's about time that all these leaders and everybody in the community got it out. Now, this is what I see. You have enough evidence so far with the Lowell Dam, all these other dams, but especially what Mr. Riggs has done. You saw from the approach that you took, you didn't go in there and do the blow and go. Pretty much punctured a hole in it. April, you let out some water twice, and in December, you let some water out twice. Issue was, they didn't bank on. They had a high precipitation event. Then it rained again in January. They had a lot of downstream flooding. Of course, that's been documented. I gotta control my hands because I don't want you to get distracted by this. But the difference between Johnston County, and that's where I got a little of this twang from because I used to work for the mayor down there. The difference between where the Lowell Dam is and where this dam is almost like night and day. This is a highly populated area. Down there, it's not. I've been there. I've walked all around. What else I don't see in this plan? What's the emergency plan? What's the contingency plan? What are the site protections? What kind of bond are you going to put up? And 5 years is not good enough for me. I think it ought to be into perpetuity, or at least 10 years at a minimum. And I think something needs to be coordinated with the city of Raleigh to protect these people downstream, and it needs to get out on the table.
I'm sorry, protect them from what?
From a potential flood. Like Adam's document. Probably didn't hurt anybody when all that flooding happened. It was 13 days straight. You gonna correct me?
I'll respond to you.
You're the one that, I read your paper, am I
Absolutely.
wrong?
I can tell. Great detail.
Yeah, well, I think we need to do something. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for the comment. And two things to go out there. One is we did learn a lot from Lowell, and we've learned a lot from other dam removals that I did not participate in, and that we are fortunate enough to have a rich literature to go by. And when I say we learned a lot from Lowell, these two guys sitting to my right in particular, they're the ones that did a lot of the science that supported the mitigation project. My dissertation involved following flows through the reservoir after the dam was removed. The dam did not add flows, and I think that's an important distinction. The removal of that dam did not cause a flood. I monitored the movement of sediment and nutrients through the old impoundment during flood events. So what I was curious about, and with the help of Martin Doyle and a few of my colleagues there at UNC, was once the dam's removed, we know that that's a susceptible time for that impoundment, as you noted. It's sensitive. We were curious what happens. What ends up leaving the impoundment that's been stored over 100 plus years, and where does it go? And so we monitored dozens of miles of river, and we followed what I refer to as a flood wave in my paper, but it was not a flood. It never left the banks of the little river. It was simply a pulse of water with some sediment and some nutrients. So I need to make that distinction, and I will gladly answer questions about this because it's important. Removing Milburnie Dam is not going to cause flooding downstream, not during the process, and not because there's a rain event after the process. We will not create a flood downstream. Now what may happen, and what you were referring to in that paper, is something that I did call a flood wave, and I wrote that out. So I'm now second guessing the use of that term 6 years later. But what it was it was during the dewatering process, and you're right, they released it twice. It was during the dewatering process. They opened the gates up, and there was what I should have called a pulse of water and material that moved downstream. So that's stored water behind the dam. It then enters the Little River and it moves downstream. It never left the banks of the Little River, so it was not a flood. That is, Martin, you deserve to be reprimanded for letting me write that in that paper. It was not a flood wave, so I apologize for that. To summarize, two quick distinctions. You're right, Lowell is not Milburnie. We did learn some lessons at Lowell. We learned some lessons at Carbonton. But there were several more, thanks to American Rivers, you saw the slide, 1,000 other dam removals out there from which we can learn. And we can avoid making mistakes that have been made over 1,000 other dam removals. So there's a lot to learn there. And it's not going to flood downstream because we de-water Milburnie. That's an important distinction.
Next question is Terry Benton.
A lot of questions have been answered, I guess not answered this evening, but I guess at this time we'll have to take that. But we appreciate you being here tonight. A couple of questions for the homeowners along the Neuse River. Ed touched on it. Will the debris be cleaned up from the river? Because when we watched the videos from my friend Janet went down and shot them, we found there was a lot of debris on the riverbank. It left a mess down there. The people were very unhappy. Would the banks be seeded? And would Restoration Systems be willing to post a bond to compensate homeowners for lost wells? Our other concern is I live in Riverbend Plantation. When this first started coming around, people from Restoration Systems apparently went and spoke with our neighbors about the Stout Lake. And they expressed to the neighbors that when the dam goes away, there'll be no flooding in our neighborhood. So I'm concerned about the level of the water in Stout Lake as well, which is in our subdivision, which is Riverbend. We're concerned. And can you address whether that lake level will be affected if the dam is taken out?
I can give you very general answers. I'm not familiar with that lake. I don't know how it's formed. Obviously, I would imagine there's a dam. It's probably not a natural lake.
Right.
I don't know the nature of that dam. I don't know where it's located relative to the Neuse River, and so honestly, I can't give you a good
question
definitive
that I
answer.
could pose and send in and give you the coordinates.
Yes, ma'am. I will gladly look into that for you.
And how about the wells that my neighbors are on, as far as damage to the wells if the dam goes away?
You know, that is a common fear with dam removal, is that, and it's logical concern, is that if you lower the water level in the river, do you affect the local groundwater table, the depth of that table, its placement in the soil? And in some cases, yes, locally you can see that. In the chances, and again, I'm not familiar with each individual well, we didn't see that problem at Lowell, and we didn't see that problem at Carbonton. I mean, George or John, were you ever called by somebody who couldn't draw groundwater because you removed the dam? So I think that groundwater is affected to a certain extent. The depth at which we usually drill in order to get groundwater for drinking water purposes is much greater than that dam is going to cause an effect to. So in other words, the straw goes so deep down to tap into the groundwater that I don't think the dam is going to have an effect.
I'm sorry, our neighbor and good friend Ed Smallwood couldn't be here tonight because he really is, I'm sure you're very familiar with that. He has a science behind him, and he really can listen to what you're saying and make sense of it, and then he can answer questions. And I wish he were here. I did bring a copy of the letter that he wrote in response to the public segment. I'd love to hand it out if I could before I go. I guess probably they have it at the core, but he had so many questions that I'm not sure really still have been answered.
Well, I will gladly, please leave your information so that I can contact you.
And Lars
we
is
can talk
right at
about
the back
that.
of the room. You can leave all your information with him. Next question is Ted Dunn.
Hi, my name is Ted Dan. I live in the Woods Creek subdivision, which is adjacent to Foxcroft. And I think you've done an excellent job in your presentation. It's provided much more information than what I knew before. And I guess my position would be that I think that whenever we would extend the natural habitat of the Neuse River an additional 15 miles, that's very appealing. And as I listen to everything, I realize the Army Corps of Engineers can't say that they're either for this or against this, but they have to remain neutral. But I think that for the neighbors who may not be exactly adjacent to the river or the dam, but are in the vicinity and have these legitimate concerns, that you work through the process, as you've obviously done so far, to address their concerns. But one of the things that was touched on briefly that I think that in addition to extending the natural habitat of the river to what it used to be, is that we have a structure that no longer serves its original purpose. And with the extension of the greenway by the Raleigh Park system, it seems that we have what is, I'm not an attorney, but I think it would be referred to as almost like a public nuisance, in the sense that you have a dam that has taken lives before, and I know for where I grew up, that's what dams do. And like you said, they don't kill one person, oftentimes they kill two people, or the number of people that go to rescue the original victim. And so that if the current owners of this dam want the liability to go away, and they don't want the risk of future deaths on their property because of the proximity to the greenway, it's almost, if I was an attorney, we talk about the scales of justice, and rarely is anything ever 100%, and it won't, obviously isn't going to be 100% in your favor because of the concerns of the neighbors in Foxcroft and Woods Creek and perhaps Hedingham. But it would seem like as you would consider the life safety issues and so many of the things that we're talking about here, that you would still tip the scales in favor of what you want to do. So I am so impressed with what you've done. Attending this, I'm more likely to support what you're trying to do, but hope that you'll, for the neighbors, continue to address their individual concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is from Cheryl Gregory.
I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay, great. Next question, John Hawley.
Listening with great interest to a lot of the information that's been presented. And one thing that I didn't hear a lot about, and I would just encourage you to take a look at if you haven't already, is the potential for head cutting and erosion in some of the tributaries that feed now into the open water. A lot of that is directly adjacent to or actually bordering on private land, and there could be some property damage that may result as a part of that erosion process that's going to naturally occur. And so some of that may need to be addressed structurally in the process of taking the dam out and doing some work to correct erosion, and I would encourage that to be looked at. And my question, I guess, would be, how much has that been looked at, and have you anticipated some potential problem areas?
Thanks for bringing that up, and that is obviously a concern that you have when you remove a dam. It's head cut migration is fairly common to see. And in certain situations, you want to see that. In other situations, like you just noted, you don't want to see that. So my biggest concern for head cuts right now is that open water area just below Beaver Dam Lake. And we're working to develop a strategy so that we don't have that problem there. Other areas that I have noted.
We were out there today.
Yeah, in fact we were. Other areas I've noted seem to have some hardened structures. There are dams with lots and lots and lots of riprap that connect the tail of the dam to the river. That's good. I mean, it's not great habitat, but that's great for a concern like you just voiced, and that we certainly share. And that will be part of the process to identify those spots and see what we can do to avoid the problems, because we want to avoid problems like that. That's important.
I just wanted to add, John, I actually spoke with Mel Nevels this morning, who I believe you work with. Right. And I was speaking with him on another matter. He brought this up too, and I committed to sitting down with you guys at Land Resources and going over it in some detail.
I believe this particular project will end up being under the city's jurisdiction. The city has a local sedimentation control program. Of course, it's delegated to them by us, and so we would be working hand in hand with
Well, y'all are experts too. We would involve the city as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Holly.
Jay St. Clair.
Hey guys, this gentleman over here sort of hit on my first question. I had two. The first one was, I was curious, is it a rumor or is it true that people have drowned here? And if so, how many people have drowned as a result of that dam?
Well, thanks, Mr. St. Clair. We got interested in that question after the 2 deaths this summer, and I asked a young fellow that works for us to go down to the News and Observer and to look it up. And it didn't take him too long. I think we identified 11 deaths that were in the paper that he was able to pull notice, some of them quite horrifying. 8 of those were doubles. In other words, there were 4 instances where 2 people died, including I don't mean to be dramatic, but a one-armed vegetable produce merchant who went in after his wife, who'd never swam a day in his life, and he only had one arm, went in after, and he went down, and that was at the cover then and Ed. But what we figure is that there are more single drownings out there that didn't get picked up by the paper because it's not as newsworthy when 2 die. So either they're, either it always kills in 2s, which is unlikely, or there are many more drownings than just the 11. So there's 11 known, and only 4 of those in the last 5 years. And I suspect, though, going back, it would be, many more and above 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a small park there that Carolyn and my father gave to the city to make a park where people can go that's public, a little bit of a public area. And there's postings and stuff about not swimming, but it's hot. It's 95 degrees in the summer, and you've got a 5-year-old who's with you fishing. It's just inevitable that somebody's going to tempt fate.
Right.
Well, it's an excellent point, and it brings up the greenway part. If you say that, the number of people that drown or get in trouble out there is a function of how many people visited in the first place, which would seem logical, that was a very obscure location in Raleigh. As we know, you can talk to a lot of people who've lived in Raleigh, some of them their whole lives, and you bring up the Milburnie Dam, they've never seen it. That's not going to be the case after they open up the full greenway to the new Blue Way. There are going to be thousands upon thousands of new visitors that never would have known that place was there. They're going to find their new swimming hole, and that's going to serve as an attractive nuisance that the twigs no longer want to
They
maintain.
put signs up, they rip them down, they rip through fences. It's just an impossible thing to keep up with.
And it's only going to get worse.
Right. What's scary too is that the water on the surface looks calm and still, but underneath it is where the strong current is. So it looks innocent, but it's not.
Right. Okay. Second question, I'll try to make this quick, is for Mr. Rigby. You did a good job talking about, I think, the theory behind, some of the negative impacts that are a result of a dam being put into a free-flowing stream. And you also talked about some of the ecological benefits that can come from removing a dam. So my question for you is, as part of this group, yourself, what have you witnessed and specifically documented, maybe some of the highlights of dam removals with this group?
In terms of the ecological changes?
The benefits.
I think the most remarkable accomplishment, if you will, or benefit was the Cape Fear Shiner in the Deep River. It was one of the only ecosystem restoration projects on the East Coast that I'm aware of where we got a federally protected species to recolonize a significantly long stretch of river, 10 miles plus additional miles in some of the larger tributaries. In fact, Tim continues to go back and document new occurrences of the species and further back into the old impoundment, which I think is just fascinating. We've also seen some great shifts in habitat. I mean, these guys have been through the river a lot more than I have, to be honest, because both those removals took place while I was conducting my dissertation research, and I did study them, but then I left in 2006, and these guys just kept going back year after year after year. So if they want to expand, I'll certainly pass it along.
So I, mentioned that the benthic macroinvertebrates are one of the first to change, and that's what we observed at both the dam removals that we're involved in. And, with them being the base of the food chain, it supported, I think, the fish species change that Tim will be able to comment on. And then ultimately, the fish are, I believe, the host for mussels, is that right? And so that's why the mussels are the last step in that process. But we also had you know, when the water goes down, there's a lot, the riverbed didn't always change as much. I mean, there's some sediment deposition, but then you also see, you know, when the water goes down, the riffle and pool sequence gets reestablished, and so you have periods of shallow, fast water within deeper, slow water. And those were there immediately in the first year, but then even over successive years of monitoring, extra ones would pop up as sediment was getting cleared out of those. And so seeing those habitats established was really great, because it made, you know, I mean, I always had to be safety conscious with our crews, but they loved going through those riffles on their canoes and stuff. And I mean, go, you got $15,000 worth of gear in that boat, you know, and they just had fun. You know? So, but, you know, and so seeing that, and then you know, there's, you know, I've heard several folks say that there's great wildlife, and you know, I totally understand that and agree with that, and I think that you're going to continue to see great wildlife, and you'll see a lot more birds all the way down along the creek, and, you know, wading birds, fishing, and I think that those things will continue.
Yeah, just add to that, as an aquatic ecologist, I love free-flowing rivers. In a presentation I've done about the Carventon Dam removal, got a shot of me standing in a riffle spot, and I tell the story that when we did the pre-removal baseline surveys, it was 17 feet deep at that spot, and we had to scuba dive to sample the bottom, whereas we were doing it, you know, wading. And riffle habitats are very species rich, very diverse, and as an ecologist, that's what you look for, you know. And
right. Thanks, guys.
There really isn't a free-flowing river, though. The Corps controls the release. Is that not true? I mean,
Can I speak up for a second?
You know, it seems to be a good point, and it's something worth pointing out. But keep in mind, that's true for every river in North Carolina. If you're on the Roanoke, you're controlled from Carr Lake Dam, whatever they call that. If you're in the Cape Fear at any point, there are 17 dams on the Cape Fear. So at every point along the Cape Fear, it's controlled. Moving along, I think that there's no major river that reaches into the Piedmont in North Carolina that isn't controlled. That said, I think it'll put significant pressure on the Corps, if they could be prevailed upon, to probably do more nature-like releases there.
I think we know that this provides the water supply for Raleigh.
That's right.
Considering the fact that the environment's changing as dramatically as it is, and there's bound to be a drought, a drastic drought, a dramatic drought, probably in our near future, in our lifetime, certainly. When the people need water more than the river needs water, what's going to happen then?
Well, just remember that the people who live in Smithfield have been dealing with the natural water level of that river, and it's never gone dry. You've never heard them say.
Smithfield's a lot smaller community.
Right, but the river has continued to flow. The noose has never gone dry below the dam. There's always been a flowing river, even during the 2007 drought. Right? So, yeah, and there's a minimum release. There's a law that says that there's a serious. Not a law?
No, it's an agreement.
Is it? Okay. An agreement that they have to release a certain amount of water for ecological purposes.
And folks, can we just ask anyone who's asking a question, since we are recording this for official U.S. Army Corps of Engineer records, that you ask your questions at the microphone? And we have one more person who registered that they wanted to ask a question, so I want to get to them
Well,
first.
Matt, if it's okay, we'll wrap this up and
Oh,
move
great,
to the next
okay,
person.
please.
In the document, there is a hydrological analysis because that's required by the Corps. In other words, will there be a sustainable flow regime to support the ecosystem we are proposing to restore? And our analysis indicates that yes, there should be. Now, extreme events are extreme events. The noose would run dry if we are in that type of drought, as you indicated, regardless of whether Falls Lake is there or not. So, you know, we can't.
We're talking about Milburnie Dam, though. There'd still be a buffer.
Well, it too would run dry if it was such an extreme event. I mean, Milburnie doesn't create water, it just holds on to it, which evaporates or goes downstream or whatever the case may be. So in this case, George was mentioning an agreement that Smithfield has with the Army Corps of Engineers and the state governments. to release water for water quality purposes downstream. In other words, I believe it's Smithfield that has a wastewater discharge. And so if there's not enough water being released from falls, then that's heavily concentrated pollution, high amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus. And they want to avoid that, and they want to avoid the smell that comes with it. So that's why you see a fairly reliable release. And again, I wrote this document so long ago, I don't recall all the details immediately, but it's in there. It's under a hydrological analysis section. And if you have questions after reading that, please get back with me or follow up with me again, and I will have read it more thoroughly and will be able to more accurately answer that.
I'll just add one thing to your question about, is it a free-flowing natural river? It's not natural. As George mentioned, it is regulated, but our control sites, which were upstream of the current impoundment, we showed that the fish fauna and the freshwater mussel fauna are kind of what you'd expect from a free-flowing river system. So we expect that those species to recolonize the impoundment that's created by Milburnie.
It's unfortunate. I understand the Twig's point of view that they want to get rid of the dam. I know there have been several people that have said that they would speak with them on a private basis. In fact, Ed Smallwood went to Winston-Salem to speak with Carolyn Fox, and he was intercepted by Mr. Howard. He didn't want to allow that conversation to go on.
Ma'am, that's not true.
That's not true?
No, I went down with him, greeted him with her. She asked me to come with him because she felt a little bit intimidated that someone wanted to come try to talk her out of something.
Well, Ed's not intimidating. He was, in fact, he felt her discomfort.
She wanted me to
that
come
day,
there and
so-
be with her.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and I didn't intercept him. We rode down to the elevator together, welcomed her back to her room, and I did my best to answer the questions that she couldn't answer.
Well, I guess
Did you
it's-
limit the number of questions that Mr. Smallwood could ask?
No.
All right, next, and our last final question that someone had indicated ahead of time, and then we can take a few more while we have time available, is Jeff, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, Destreich?
It's a follow-up, I think, on the hydrological question. Is there any hydrological effect on the 9 miles above the pool? Is there any shock absorber effect from having that pool down there? Or a rate change?
Could you rephrase the question for me? I'm sorry.
On the section of river above the pool, the pool water where it's
Right. Within the impoundment? Or
above the impoundment, between the impoundment and Falls Dam.
Okay.
Is there going to be any hydrological change to that? Is the flow going to go faster or?
I expect the answer is imperceivably yes. Impoundments, we have to draw a line and say the effect stops here, but that's not necessarily true because there's secondary effects. So I think, yes, it could get a little bit faster, but I don't think that you would notice, to be honest.
All right, and I believe we have time for 2 more questions. Sir?
I had indicated I wanted to ask a question. I'm Gene Hayden from Foxcroft, and my interest in the river is that I canoe the river with my children and my grandchildren, so I really enjoy the impoundment area because I can canoe right down to where my property is. But my question is, the real reason for taking down the dam is to receive the mitigation credits, and the goals that you have are to achieve, or to measure how much credit you get. And I notice you guys sitting at the table here are pretty much all of the same community. You're interlinked to some degree. And I suppose in monitoring the river, that those monitoring studies are paid for by IRS, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, my question is, how do you maintain your independence when your client is going to be the person who benefits from your results? And who monitors your independence? That would be my question.
I'll be glad to take a shot at that. And obviously, Restoration Systems is the sponsor of the Mitigation Bank. As you've heard from the owners of the dam tonight, the dam is their private property. They wish to see it removed. We've been engaged in an effort with them to go through the permitting process The team of consultants we have up here tonight does work for many other clients, much bigger and more powerful than Restoration Systems. And their projects have to be reviewed by the Corps of Engineers too. So I think that in the spirit of a positive discourse, you shouldn't cast aspersions on the team of consultants we have up here tonight or the quality of their work, because if there was a made as instructed type of work product, they would not have any credibility with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for other clients. And instead, they have a great deal of credibility based on their track record of long, successful projects.
I want to speak to the integrity of your data.
Yeah. I understand why you would ask the question. I get it. But I'm sure you understand the response I'm about to give you, which is I like to be a person of integrity. I went to school studying systems that I love, and I hoped that when I got out, I could be a part of something that was giving back, and that wasn't taking paychecks, and that was the only concern. I like to get paid, I'll be honest. I do have 2 small children and a wife and a house, so I do have to pay the bills, but I don't do it at the expense of my integrity, and I don't think these guys do either.
I'll just add to that, we are contracted by Restoration Systems, but the amount that we get paid has no bearing on whether they receive maximum credit or no credit. We're getting paid the same amount regardless. I mean, if the dam's removed and Restoration Systems aren't awarded any credits, we're still going to be expecting our paycheck. So
Not being paid by the shad.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
All right, we have time for one final question.
I believe I put my name on, or check mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, it looks like we missed a couple. Please come on up. And could you just state your name when you get to the microphone as well?
Hi, my name is Farrell Benton. I live right on the river. I enjoy the river for the way it is. I'm wondering why the lake adapted species are such a bad thing. It looks like they're all going to go away, and in return you'll get 1, maybe 2 each opportunity to watch the shad swim by and somewhat catch them. Also, I didn't realize they were an endangered species. I also understand that they are commercially fished, so I can't imagine that would be allowed if that were in fact the case. The other thing is, we noticed in our neighborhood, we have a little lake there. We spend a lot of money maintaining the lake. It's a lake called Lake Iris. I'm surprised you didn't notice it. It backs right up to the dam.
I'm sure I noticed it. I don't know which one is yours.
Okay.
That's my problem. Sorry about that.
But when the water level in the river comes out due to flooding or due to releases from the dam, Falls Lake Dam, our neighborhood floods, and it doesn't flood by coming back up over the dam. It comes up, it seeps up through the sand. So we know that the sand is coarse enough to allow water to come up through it. So obviously it's going to be coarse enough that water goes back down through it. So when that level goes down, our lake's going to go away. 99% positive for that. And I'm just wondering, how we'd be compensated for that.
A lot of questions there. I think, Tim, would you address the species questions?
Yeah, the lake adapted species, they won't disappear. They'll inhabit pools, as Adam mentioned earlier, rather than a homogeneous river of just deep pool habitat. You'll have ripple runs and pools, and so those species that are there now, we expect them to continue to be there, just not totally dominated. It'll be a more ecologically diverse fish fauna. The bit about the American shad being endangered, that's if
None of us suggest
yeah, it's not an endangered species. There are state endangered, state threatened species that do occur in the Neuse River, and we hope to see a benefit to those species from removal. And that's maybe where the confusion came from.
Again, in reference to the dam, I'll certainly follow up with you guys on that. That is the same lake, correct? That you were referring to, ma'am? Okay. Okay, great. So we'll follow up with you on that. Again, I don't know the location exactly. I do know the soils fairly well through that floodplain area along the whole impoundment, and it's not as much sand as you think. Now, your location may be a completely different story, and I just haven't seen it and haven't been on the ground yet. But what I know going up and down that impoundment is a whole heck of a lot of fine sediment. And fine sediment doesn't actually allow for a lot of flow up and down. It traps water and holds on to it very effectively. That's just my observation across the reach as a whole. I'm not trying to discredit or challenge your observations over time. You know your place better than I do. But I'll gladly make a visit, and I will learn what I can learn, and I'll share with you what I learned.
If the water level ever changes that dramatically in the near future, I'll make sure I...
Is there a dam in place now, sir? Okay, so chances are good, and again, I'll learn more once I'm on the ground. Chances are good someone built that dam to hold water that was coming upslope. That's what dams are for. They didn't build the dam to hold water that comes in underground, because you wouldn't need a dam if it just simply exchanged underground. So a dam usually traps surface water, not groundwater. It's not always the case, but the position of the dam that I'm just assuming based on what I've learned here tonight suggests to me that it's capturing water coming from upslope along the bank, and then it's holding it in place. So your experience, again, I'm not trying to argue with it.
Modified. I couldn't tell you exactly what the slope is.
But I'll be glad to take a look, and everything I learn, I will share.
Right. Oh, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think, one thing, if you think about it, I work with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I'm a civil servant to the population of the country, the state, the city, and locals. But the way I look at it is that I think there's a real misconception about why we would support this type of thing. And if you just look at the stretch of river from the dam, past your property or even up to the lake, and the benefit that people would have seeing the fish, American shad, sturgeon, whatever, as it relates to that property, is relatively finite. It's like you said, what's the benefit if I see a shad, or even if there's 10 people fishing for them, what's the big deal? There's not that big a deal about that. But the thing you've got to bear in mind is that the fish that spawn in this area are the same ones that feed the speckled trout, the puppy drum, the flounders, the bluefish, the tunas, the mackerels, the dolphins. So when you go down to Oriental or go down to Atlantic Beach, or if you look at the recreational fishing industry in North Carolina, it's a $1.4 billion industry. There's a lot of people that make their living do that. A lot of people's children have their jobs. So it's a state and federal resource. If it was a private farm pond or a private lake, absolutely. But the thing is, I think there's a problem in that some people consider the river their lake. And actually, it is very important to the populace of the state and the country. And that's the reason we're interested in it. If there wasn't a huge benefit, I would personally never support it, because it obviously, some people love the dam and think it's pretty and that kind of thing.
The question I'd have about that is to have the least impact. Why wouldn't a fish ladder be just as effective?
We're building a fish ladder, the Corps of Engineers is, on Lock and Dam number 1. It's a $13 million project. Now, I've got we've got steep pass ladders at Holtz Lake. In other words, that's one of the things I interact with, is building fish ladders. It's not, to build a fish ladder on Milburnie Dam would probably cost several $100,000. We've been trying to get funding to build a fish ladder at Crabtree Creek, which is owned by the city of Raleigh. They're pretty sweet on it. I mean, they've got no objection. The homeowners there that are the controlling interest at Laster's Mill Dam, and I haven't talked to the people that live around the dam, but I feel fairly confident in dealing with this type of things before, is that if we if we built it and it looked nice in keeping with that historic structure, they'd be fine with it. The problem is there's no money to do things like that. We're under I think the notion that fish ladders are relatively inexpensive is generally not true. They're fairly expensive. The idea that
about several $1 million in credits stuff available to
I'll gladly
restoration.
answer the question there, Mike.
yeah.
So, in core speak, that would be an alternative. And the alternative wouldn't work for two reasons. One, Mike was getting at, it's expensive. And just because we've passed SHAD over Milburnie doesn't mean that it generates enough credits to pay for the fish ladder. In fact, it probably doesn't. That's the least productive ecological component of this project in terms of credit potential. We have to think like that. This is a project that is, has a budget. And whatever credits we generate have to be able to sell to recoup the cost. The other thing is that it probably increases their liability at the site. You still have a dam in place. That hasn't gone away. And now you probably added another nuisance on top of it. Now you're going to have the potential for people to climb up and down a fish ladder. That sounds like you've just increased on an old structure. Right, and George brought that point up earlier that you're putting some nice new piece of technology on top of a very old foundation.
As far as that goes, as far as where there's a concern for safety, now taking that dam down is just going to expose more areas of rocks and places where the current isn't obvious all along the riverbank, and that together with the greenway, I would think the safety issue is sort of just going to be dispersed. It's just going to be moved.
The simple fact is the owners don't perceive it that way, and they're the ones that are bearing the cost and the anxiety for your aesthetic pleasure. And I don't mean that as flippant as it sounds, but that's what's going on now. They're no longer willing to bear that. Okay, so even if some alternatives, their opinion is the most important opinion in the room. If they didn't want the dam removed, we wouldn't be here.
But we're open for other people to purchase the dam. I mean, that's certainly a
There are
conversation.
more than one concern. What I want to say is I really honor and appreciate your long patience with this long process.
Mm-hmm.
And I also understand that you have private concerns for your private property because it's going to affect your private property. As I tried to say, and I'm not a public speaker, but my father did not go into this without thinking this through. He was a citizen of Raleigh in a big way. He cared deeply about the public. And he chose these people because he knows they were going to do something that was going to have the least negative damage as possible for everybody else. So the only thing I want to say is I want to know that I honor and hear your concerns. And it is my hope that this process of what you've seen will at least alleviate some of your concerns. There will be change. Change is inevitable. Change will happen. Change is hard. And there's going to be pros and cons for everybody. And I have to reiterate what George said. Honestly, I'm really just following through with my father's wishes. I've not been that involved in the process, although he talked to me a lot about it. But I'm seeing why he wanted to make this decision. He had grave concerns for Carolyn and her family, as you could imagine. And in addition, he was very concerned about liability. And he did have an environmental concern. So it's on several levels. It's not just about shad. It's not just about lake levels. It's about so many things. And my hope is that although it will change the area, it will still be really beautiful. I think it will still be really beautiful. And I don't think my dad would have chosen this path if he thought he was going to leave a mess for other people. He wasn't that person. I really don't think that's going to happen. And I hope the hard work of these people, this presentation, it certainly impressed me. And I hope you see there really is a genuine effort. It's not about, money will be made. There's money in this process. That's how it's going to work. But it's not about coming in and just raping the land and
rolling over people and taking the money, and it's really not.
Well, we love the river as well. We're out there every year.
I know.
cleaning up. We're very much participating.
I know, and I appreciate you guys being so participatory. And
Another thing about the dam going away, that's going to make the river accessible to canoers and kayakers. The people who now can take advantage of miles of the river by going in another boat other than a kayak or boat, canoe, will lose access to that river. I have elderly uncles, elderly father-in-law that really very much love to come and go fishing there. That's going to go away for them. There's no way that they'll be able to access that 8-mile stretch. And I'm just wondering, if there aren't other people that are not as well enabled, and all you guys are going to be old someday, maybe would like to have something like that available to you. It's just a comment, and I think it's a fair comment to say you're taking something away other than the monetary value you're getting out of it.
I think that's I work around dams a lot. I have the unfortunate task sometimes of talking to parents whose children have died at dams. I talked to the Apex Fire Department that pulled up the 2 kids that drowned last summer, and it's hard for somebody like me. As far as I know, I may have liabilities working on fish ladders and having people drownings, but liabilities don't drive somebody like me. But what does drive me is that if I know that you're doing something that will ultimately result in a child's death that was avoidable, that's a very driving thing for somebody like me. And I think
more kids drowned in buckets than drowned down there.
If the hydraulic beneath Milburnie Dam, underneath the tail race, episodically is such that I couldn't swim past it. I don't think anybody could swim through it. I'll take you out there and show you sometime if you'd like to. It's a death trap, and it's not a situation where somebody can't swim. That's not what it is. I'll be happy to show it to you if you'd like me to.
All right, folks. I think
any body water is a death trap.
No, absolutely.
If your children are not.
I'm talking. Yeah, I'll be happy.
That water.
Right. That's not correct.
Yeah.
I mean, the potential to drown in anything is there, but this curler hydraulic, it's a death trap.
All right, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and staying a lot longer than we all originally planned.
If we have more questions,
yes, if you have more questions, Lars is at the back of the room. Please go to him, and you can register your name, contact information, and who you think would be the best person from the team up here to respond to you, and we will get back to you. Thank you all.
And a special thanks to Tiffany Bynum.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you.